Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Vernin podcast. I'm your host, and today I have a very interesting guest, a famous author and spiritual teacher, a lifelong disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda. She's worked closely with Paramahansa Yogananda's direct disciple, Swami Kriyananda, for 45 years. She's one of the founding members of Ananda Village and served as one of the spiritual directors of Ananda Palo Alto since 1987. She has a repository of wisdom, and she's here to share her message with you today. Today I'm speaking with Asha Nayaswami. Asha, welcome.
Thank you. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to share. Thank you for inviting me.
It's my pleasure. So let's dive into it. Firstly, who is Asha Nayaswami?
Huh. The face in the name, the name you hear, the face you see in front of you. That's been my own lifelong quest. Who am I? That in itself is an entire spiritual path. And I'm an American. I was born in 1947. I was raised in a Jewish family. I was always a truth seeker. And when I was 22 years old, which was 1969, quite a while ago, I had the great, extraordinary blessing of meeting Swami Kriyananda. He was a disciple of Yogananda. I was already deeply devoted to the path of self-realization, which I discovered a few years before. Yogananda didn't speak to me. I didn't feel his energy until I met Swami Kriyananda. Kriyananda was the first person I had ever met who I wanted to emulate. He had what I wanted, which I hardly even knew what I wanted, but I recognized it when I saw it. He was joyful, he was courageous, he was free in the sense of unafraid, courageous. And I just decided at that point that I would walk in his footsteps, and I never looked back.
Wow, that's a that's a lot of stuff there, which we're definitely gonna unpack as we go through this exciting
Okay.
podcast. Um, and you mentioned so many things there. Something that stood out, obviously, is in the title of the name, Asha Nayaswami. So, what does Nayaswami mean?
Nayaswami is actually a title, and the second word, Swami, is very obvious. Swami is a person who's dedicated to the spiritual life, and Naya means new. There's been a Swami order well known to anyone who touches any Indian teaching. It's been there for hundreds of years, started by Swami Adi Shankaracharya. He organized the monastic life in India and systematized it in what became the Swami order, which is all the people that you see walking around in orange robes. But he organized it for a society that no longer exists. Among the many conditions, you never handled money, you had no possessions, you moved every 3 days, you traveled on foot, just things that you just are unthinkable now. And even if you're highly devoted to spiritual life now, you need a bank account and you tend to want to live somewhere. So Swami Kriyananda felt inspired by God, it wasn't a random thought, that it was time to modernize, might be the right word, but just make the Swami order more appropriate for the times in which we live. And one of the shifts, because one of the things that's characteristic of the time we live in now, is that people are integrating spiritual life into everyday life. Whereas in the past, the culture, the society itself was so deeply materialistic, but so physically heavy, that if you really wanted to devote yourself to God, you had to walk away. So the color was orange, because orange is fire. It burns up everything. So you're burning up all your attachments. You're renouncing everything. When Swami Kriyananda decided to create a Nayaswami order, he changed the color to blue, which is what you see me wearing, because blue is the color of the infinite light, color of Krishna, the color of the Christ consciousness, the Krishna consciousness. So the emphasis on the Nayaswami order is not what we're burning up and leaving behind. It's not on renunciation. It's what we're expanding into becoming. So those of us, and among other things, it's possible to be a Nayaswami and not renounce your marriage partner, for example. A couple can become Nayaswamis together, which is the way it was in ancient India. The sages were married. Then in between, you had to become a monk, and being a monastic is still a valid path, but not for everyone.
Mm.
So Nayaswami just brings us into the age of which we're rising into. So in 2009, Swami Kriyananda conducted the first initiation, and I was part of that. And so Asha is also not the name my parents gave me. It's an Indian word, an Indian name, means hope. It was given to me by Swamiji. So I decided to affirm my identity by just jettisoning all the other identities I had before. So this is what my passport says and my driver's license and my tax return. It's just, this is who I am.
That's a beautiful explanation of what the term Nayaswami means. So thank you for sharing that. I want to just unpack this a bit because there's a lot. I mean, this journey on becoming an Nayaswami doesn't happen overnight. It's been a long quest, a longing, and this quest for truth. So take us a bit through the early years, this thirst that you had for spiritual wisdom. How does this come about on you? How did it dawn on you? And how were you cognizant of it?
Well, it's factoring in reincarnation, which you have to factor in, otherwise life makes no sense. That's just my opinion. If you try to figure out your life from when you came into this body until you leave it, there's a whole lot of unfinished business that just floats all over the place. So assuming past lives, I think I've been a truth seeker for many incarnations. I've tried out many other ways of living, which is how reincarnation works. You have this idea in your mind that something's going to make you happy, and you devote yourself to trying to achieve it. That's what moves us through life. That's karma. Karma says, I need this to make me happy. And then if we add will to that inclination and energy to that inclination, then we spend lifetimes pursuing it. And we have to do that because the only way we actually learn is from experience. We do not learn from being told. If you actually learn something from somebody telling you, is because you were just exactly at the point where you were able to learn it, and then somebody put it into words for you or exemplified it, and you recognized it. So I look back on my life. I was introduced, this would have been 1966. And I live in Northern California, right near San Francisco, and I've lived here for decades. And it has been the center, the global center of the East and West merging. So in the late 60s and into the 70s, there was this huge wave of interest and energy from India to America, and very specifically to Northern California. And I was part of that wave. I was 18 years old. Somebody handed me a book by Swami Vivekananda, foremost disciple of Ramakrishna, of course, great avatar of the late 1800s. And I had already attended 1 year of university, and I had already flunked out of university, not because I couldn't do the work, but because I made A's and F's. That's the American grading system. I either got the top grade or the bottom grade, because I could do the work, but I just thought it was pointless. I had no worldly ambitions that required that kind of training. I didn't want to be a doctor, a lawyer, a professor. I was talented and from a sufficiently privileged class that I could have done anything, and none of it looked meaningful to me. And I was a little desperate. And then somebody handed me Vivekananda's book, and I read it. And this was the first thing that made sense to me. Reincarnation, karma, God realization as the goal, a guru. And there was nothing in my past that would have brought me to that, except that I had always been a truth seeker. I had always been asking the question, Not just what do you think and what are people doing and what does society want from me, but on a profound level, what is deeply true. And oddly, I also always saw my life in terms of my death. And it wasn't that death frightened me in any way. It's just that I knew it would end. And even when I was very young, I could see the end of it. And I realized at the end of it, nothing would have mattered except who I had become. But nobody was teaching me what I should become. And I didn't have any of those words for it, but it was just this restless determination, which Vivekananda Ramakrishna just took me like this. But the problem I still had was that I couldn't change my life. I was just one person. And I didn't want to be a Catholic nun. I didn't want to be a Protestant missionary. I was too cowardly to go to India. It was just too scary to me to do that. And so a few years after that, that was when Swami Kriyananda came. He was American. He was building, of all things, a community out in the country. He had a meditation retreat. He was a disciple of an Indian master. What is there not to love? I just dropped everything and went to it. Why I did that was because I was ready to do that. Because not just in this life, because I was so young, what did I know? Because in many previous incarnations, I checked a lot of boxes. Money, fame, it's not that I remember those lives, but I know that I did it because of the way I feel about those things. They're nice. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's not enough. Now, I don't remember the question you asked me, so did I answer it or not?
You absolutely did. You answered it, and every answer you give me, I have more questions.
Okay,
But that's
that's good.
absolutely profound. That's so profound. Thank you. And obviously that didn't happen by coincidence, and you obviously were being guided by your intuition that helped you along that and navigate, because that's a really early age to come to a realization that the rest of your life wouldn't matter because you could see the end now, and you have to do the work now in order to for that to take shape. So that was like really early that these things were in perspective for you. Now, obviously, that comes as a result of who you were in past lives. And so, karma and reincarnation. I know it's a very broad topic, and this is a topic by itself. But like, how is one like consciously aware of it? Like, what's like, are there stuff that repeats itself in your life as you navigate? What was guiding you at the time and shaping your life to tell you that you're an old soul or you've lived through many incarnations?
The Sanskrit word is for the individuality is jiva. In English, we use the word soul, but it's not quite the same word. Jiva takes in the part beyond our cognition, the superconscious union with the divine, and also all of the limited identifications, which we tend to call ego, meaning ego is not your enemy. Ego is just the part of you that knows which body is yours and what you're supposed to do with it. And the jiva is that constant thread of individuality, the fact that in this weird, mysterious way that I can't explain, you're always yourself. I'm always me. I wake up every morning and I'm still me. It startles me. I know most people don't think about it. They take it for granted, but to me, it's very startling. And that there's been an identifiable individuality all the way through. And everyone is unique. It just fascinates me just to see. I mean, I'm looking at your face and I know I don't know you well. We've just met. I have an intuitional feeling of affinity, but I've never met your mother. I don't know what your life is like. I don't have any idea what has been dear to you all these years, but you know that whole story. And you respond constantly according to that story. So there is you repeating is a word for it, but what it is you are an actual individual on its own journey, having its own experiences, and it will end in God realization, because that is the end of the story for everyone. It just depends how long it takes. So when you asked me the question, who is Asha Nayaswami? And I said, who am I is really the question. And that question asks in many different ways. You know, what awakens my heart? What gives me joy? What talents do I feel compelled to express? Whom do I love? And who are the ones that I don't love? And what tends to take away my joy? You know, and there's all these patterns which are not randomly repeating. They are the particular plot line that this particular jiva is following. This particular jiva is a really good talker. She's always been a really good talker when I was a little kid. And I think I've been a good talker for a really, really, really long time, you know, and words are my story now. And so I write them and I speak them. And I love music, but I'm not a musician. I have an affinity for physical, you know, visual beauty, but that's not what I do. You know, so these are, and it's just, I've come to just trust the flow. You know, you just, and it's not like it comes effortlessly because you have to discipline yourself and work hard. But I also just I'm not afraid of my own inclinations.
Mm.
And you can tell who you are by looking around. You know, look at the room that you live in. And if you were a detective and had to figure out who this person was, who are they? What are their interests? What's important to them? Look at the clothes that you wear. Look at the haircut that you choose. You know, these are all just tell you what your karma is. Because your karma is just the next thing that you have to learn about what gives you, what causes suffering and what brings happiness. And that's the whole story. Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda, reduced the entire spiritual path to an effort to the necessity to understand what causes suffering and what brings lasting joy. Not merely what's easy and pleasurable, that's quite different. But what really brings you lasting joy and what really takes that joy away. That's all we're doing here. That's the whole purpose of life.
Thank you for that. You really frame stuff in a different way, stuff that I hadn't considered or thought about as well. So very beneficial. I'm very intrigued with what you mentioned about what causes suffering and what brings us everlasting joy, because that alone, to unpack that is a mammoth task, because we're living in this age now, in this world actually, where there's so much of suffering. People constantly ask, like, firstly, if there is a God, why is there suffering? Why are people going through these trials and tribulations? Why aren't everybody living a joyous life? And then the concept of joy, and what is everlasting joy? Joy from a material part, which is not just a bad thing, but everlasting joy. And we know what everlasting joy means, but I'm very fascinated. So why don't you just share a bit about that phrase?
Well, every sentient creature has the capacity, it responds to try to shrink from pain and reach toward pleasure. They apparently can train a worm, you know, to avoid the place where the electric shock is and to go to the place where the food is. You know, that's about a most basic level. But when there is consciousness by its very nature seeks joy. Now, if you think about it, you know, just for a minute, that's like every time you do something, every decision you make, every time you move in a certain direction, it's because you think it will increase your happiness and decrease your suffering. Now, that includes people who are viciously evil, but they believe that by this action their suffering will diminish. And sometimes people who've really been hurt, have a lot of hurt in them, imagine that if I now hurt you, I'll have less pain in me. Of course, that is ignorant. It doesn't work. But the reason the person does that is because they think it will work. And this is the great, I mean, you come back to, you raised all the questions too. If there is a God, why did he set up such a crummy system? And I think that's a really, really good question that everybody has to ask. But the masters, every saint, every master, Sanatana Dharma, the ancient teaching of India, which is not Hinduism. Hinduism is religion. Christianity is religion. Judaism is religion. Every master, Krishna, Moses, Jesus, they had a direct perception, a revelation of what is reality. And the nature of that revelation is, where does happiness come from and what causes us suffering? Now, for reasons that I cannot explain, and if it were up to me, I would have organized it differently. God made it so that the truth of that is hidden from us, and that it takes many, many experiences before we begin to really realize that selfishness does not lead to happiness. If I get my happiness at the expense of your pain, it's not going to work out. And the other part of that, which is important to say, is if suffering was the divine purpose of incarnations, if suffering were the why we're here, we would accept it without rebellion. But everybody, when they suffer, knows that there's something wrong, and that we begin to direct ourselves to getting out of that suffering. Maybe we may make stupid decisions, like suicide, as an example, which is just the mistaken idea that I can obliterate my consciousness. That it's so painful to be conscious, I will obliterate my consciousness, and then I won't feel anything. But unfortunately, the jiva continues. You can take the body off, but you can't kill consciousness, because consciousness is the fundamental. Consciousness is reality. But I mean, that's a very extreme example. But people drink, they endlessly scroll on their devices. They're afraid to open their hearts. They do everything to accumulate money and don't think about anything else. Just name it. And all of it is, then I'll feel better. But what gradually happens is that circumstances do not create our happiness. What creates our happiness is who we are inside and how we respond to those circumstances. And then the masters present to us exceedingly challenging teachings, exceedingly challenging examples of the capacity to be in a state of unlimited joy, no matter how bleak the circumstances. And saints also tell us the same thing. But we have this weird idea that good means easy and pleasurable, and bad means challenging and difficult. And we also think that life is supposed to be easy and pleasurable, and if it's not, there's something fundamental wrong, and that's why I'm an atheist, because if there was a God, he would make the world match what I think it should be. And we just beat our heads against that, and for a long time, many incarnations, until finally, between our lives, maybe a guardian angel says to us, "And how's that working for you?" It's just as simple as that. How's that working for you? So, it's your 50th lifetime as a heroin addict. How's that working for you? Or it's just a selfish rich man. How is that working for you? And that finally we start asking different questions.
I really like that.
Say again?
I really like that. What you mentioned just now, it stuck with me, talking about, for us, whatever is good is easy, and whatever is bad is something that's difficult. And I have another 10 more questions that I'll come back to that shortly. Before we go any further in this, for the benefit of the audience as well, I think it's important that we clarify this man was building communities and leading retreats, so Swami Kriyananda. And who is he and the Indian master that we mentioned just now, Paramahansa Yogananda?
Paramahansa Yogananda was born in 1893, just a little bit after the time that Ramakrishna died. 1893, he was a Bengali, born in Calcutta. And he wrote the book Autobiography of a Yogi, which is one of the premier, it's one of the most successful spiritual autobiographies in the world. And even after all these years, it's in dozens of languages, and sells millions of copies, and almost everyone on the Western side, but increasingly on the Eastern side also, almost everybody on the Western side who's woken up to spirituality, that book has been part of their journey. Whether it has been the definition of their life, as it has been for me, but he's a major spiritual influence of our time. And the other thing that was unique about him is that he's a God-realized master with a line of gurus, which also includes Jesus and also includes Mahavatar Babaji, who's very well known all over India as the deathless master in the Himalayas. And so Yogananda follows in that lineage. Yogananda was the first Indian guru of that stature to make his life in the West. And so when he was 27 years old in 1920, he came on the boat from Calcutta to, from Mumbai, I think, to the US. And he only went back to India once in the next 30 years that he lived there. And he eventually settled in Southern California in Los Angeles and founded what is known as the Self-Realization Fellowship. And he basically just took the ancient teachings of India, and it wasn't a new teaching, but he called it a new expression. It's like this is part of his teaching is that we're in a higher age. We're moving out of the age of matter, which is called Kali Yuga, into the age of energy, with Dwapara Yuga. This is not 100% accepted on the Indian tradition, but Yogananda corrected that tradition, that we are now in the age of energy. We've moved out of the darkest age. And in this age, spirit and the material life can merge more. So he just took everything that was in the Indian tradition and modernized it for the Western world. He didn't change any of the principles or abandon any. He just modernized them. He talked about how to have success, how to make money, how to be a good artist. He just did all the things that people want to do, how to have a good marriage, how to attract a soul partner, how to educate and raise children. You just name it. He talked about it. But he talked about it from, if self-realization, which is our final understanding of what causes suffering and what causes joy, if that is really the goal of life, how would we be married? How would we make money? How would we educate children? How would we be artists or whatever we want to be? Just turn the perspective. And he had he touched the lives of many thousands of people. He spoke to thousands during his lifetime. He died in 1952, just before he was 60, so it was a relatively short life. The last 3 years of his life, Swami Kriyananda, that's his Indian name, but he's American. His name is James Donald Walters. That's what his parents called him. He actually grew up in Europe. So by the time he was 10, he was speaking 4 languages. So his upbringing is global rather than American, but he's also very American. His parents, that's who they were. And so he was part of Yogananda's organization. He was expelled from that organization at a certain point and had to create a way to serve his guru. So there he is in San Francisco, just as like in the late 60s, he's in San Francisco, where the whole of American society is just blowing up, and this huge movement toward a completely different way of living. My generation, we just sort of took over American society and made it different. And Swami Kriyananda was right in the middle of that. And one of Yogananda's ideals, intentions, was that because this is such a materialistic age, and we are going to a higher age, but we're in a very tumultuous transition, and those of like mind need to stick together. Because environment is very powerful, so he proposed intentional spiritual community, where people of kindred spirits and same values make a life together, with homes, job, family, temple, so that we can essentially create a new spiral that will help others. And that was the community that he was building, the first community that based on Yogananda's principles. And we were out in the country. We lived very primitively. We were dirt poor. We had so much fun. It was just fantastic. And then gradually, from that basis, Swami Kriyananda went on to do much more. He founded work in Europe. He ended his life in India, and wrote 150 books and all this music, but all of it was as a disciple. He was here to do his disciples' work. I met Swami Kriyananda. I never met Yogananda in the body, just in the spirit. But and I just felt that my job was to learn from Swami Kriyananda and then to tell everybody what he taught me. And basically, that's what I've been doing.
Mhm.
I've been fundamental in founding 2 of those communities. And I haven't written the books like he has, but I've written a few. This is so there's the story. And what Kriyananda did, because he was a citizen of the world, he was at home wherever he was. He spoke 8 languages by the end of his life, and would often people would just think he was from that country because of his way, except he looked a certain way. But he took the principles that Yogananda was talking about. If self-realization is the goal, how would we do this? And he just wrote on all these different subjects. So what he did is he created the blueprint. Kriyananda did. He created the template for a new way of approaching life, which it's based on Yogananda's teachings, but it's not a sectarian path. It's self-realization, which is, if I want to awaken to my own complete potential, how do I live? So I love it and have loved it all these years because it's so practical. We're not lost up here with Sanskrit words that we don't understand and metaphysical principles that make no sense. It's more like, I don't feel very well today. What can I do to make myself feel better? I'm not getting anything that I want out of life. What's wrong? Do I have the wrong intentions or the wrong methods? And how do I fix it?
Absolutely true, and so brilliantly said. And that's been one of my experiences as well. That's the reason why when I started the course Lessons in Meditation and started to go through those readings, it was informing and enlightening me about those topics, complex stuff, but in a way that's simple and easy to understand. But at the same time, it was answering questions that I didn't even know that I had. And as I navigated through those courses, it was the same thing. It was stuff that I was contemplating in my mind, thinking about, like especially like, what is the purpose of my life? What's important? Is family important? Is it getting a good job important to me? And that's when I went on that journey, and the same thing, realizing what's short-term bliss and satisfaction, and what's experiencing glimpses of that everlasting joy, the highest and fulfilling thing that you could do with your life. And Ananda's and the teachings has definitely been able to help me in my pursuit. And so that's been my experience, a very profound and beautiful journey. And yeah, those are the same questions that I ask myself as well.
It's the same questions everybody asks themselves, but you can only get the answer that you're ready to receive. And so we just progress step by step according to the divine plan, according to our inner blueprint, according to our own next necessary lesson. But we're all going in the same direction, and we're not discovering or exploring a separate truth. We're just finding our way, into this reality and taking the part that works for us for now until we finish that. Just like school. It's school. You can't take calculus if you don't know how to add numbers. You have to start where you start. But when you finally get to the higher level, it's because of every step you took along the way. It's not separated. Even the really bad, foolish things that we do. If I could have done better, I would have done better. My favorite phrase for myself is, it seemed like a good idea at the time. I just would have done it.
So, thank you. I want to find out from you, in your experience, obviously with this wealth of wisdom, having all of these experiences and spending valuable time with Swami Kriyananda, how would you describe self-realization, and like, how did you know that it suited you? It was a perfect fit for you to evolve spiritually and grow.
That's a very good question. Self-realization is not original with Yogananda. It was already being used. Vivekananda, Ramakrishna used it, and it goes back into, there was actually, well, there was actually litigation on who owned the phrase self-realization. So I know a lot of history about it. I mean, it's always been there, but it was a uniquely helpful word when Yogananda wanted to bring this teaching into the West in general, but to America in particular. The nature of self-realization, just by its own words, is that it's an individual, not an institutional pursuit. And the self in self-realization is always written with a capital S, because we basically have two things that we call ourself. When you say, who is Asha Nayaswami? Well, she's this face and this body and these parents and that experience, and I only speak English. I mean, and I have white skin relatively. I didn't know I had white skin until somebody pointed that out to me, because everybody had white skin around me. But, somebody referred to a white woman, and I said, you mean me? Oh, yeah, okay, me. So I'm a white woman in a context. And all of that is also true about me. But there's also, all of this, the power that allows me to express in this unique way, is not those small things. It's the infinite self that manifests through this body, which is why when I made the reference to suicide, which believe me, I'm not casual about that, so I don't want you to think that I don't understand all the angst that's involved in that. But it is the mistaken belief that if I get rid of this body, I get rid of the self. So you can break the big self's identification with the small self by getting rid of the body. But then we are still animated by that divine, and we just live in another dimension until we pick up another body like this. So self-realization is really just coming, and the word realization is the second part of it, because it's not acquisition, it's not honorarium, it's not earning, it's nothing. It's that you realize. Now, when you just think about the word realize, you said, oh, I just realized I have an appointment at 4:00 this afternoon. You didn't just create that appointment. The appointment was always there, but you didn't know. And so self-realization is to suddenly realize that I'm not the limited self that I tend to identify with, starting with whatever body you're in right now, but I'm actually the infinite self. So if you think of it, it's a continuous, there's no break. Think of like a funnel that is very wide at the top and very narrow at the bottom. And it's like we are connected to infinity, and all that infinity pours down, gets into this tiny little opening at the bottom, pours in as life force into this body, and then we think this is what we are. But the fact is, or I should say that we are actually the length of the funnel, would be more fair. We're that little skinny piece. But there's no break between us and the infinite. This opening triangle just literally goes out to infinity. It's just that most of the time we have a lid on. We're only seeing the world through our physical senses, and we're believing the story that's being told around us about who I am and who I'm supposed to be and what's going to make me happy. And when I was young, because of the context in which I lived, highly educated parents, certain expectations, we were not wealthy by any means, but we were settled and comfortable. And I was very good at school, but it was just like some old karma of mine. It took zero effort for me to be good at school. So I'm very school smart. If you're school smart in our present culture, that makes you, like, everybody thinks that you've got your act together and that you can do anything. And I was perfectly conscious of the fact that none of it meant anything to me, but everybody around me was trying to tell me, I had it made, everything was fine, because that was here. And I just knew it wasn't true. So Vivekananda told me, just take the lid off. Start, and then afterwards I learned selfless service. I mean, I learned philosophy. I learned the metaphysics of it. I learned to meditate. I started recognizing that I didn't have to identify with such a small reality, which is what I intuitively knew, but nobody had explained to me how to do it. They just told me this is what it was, my brain and my body, use your brain and your body. But really, is that all? You know, does that make sense?
It
So
does. It does. Absolutely.
it's just waking up. It's just using the right methods to wake yourself up to discover what has always been there, but you forgot.
Hmm.
And it's really goofy. As I said, if I was in charge, I would make it different. But nobody's ever asked me, so I can't. But it
Yes.
does work. It works once you really. But is it easy? No, it's not easy because you have all this momentum, you have all this pull from society, pushing you in another direction. So no, you have to come to the realization that there's no other choice.
Hmm.
And that's part of what you do. You keep trying. And I'm the same. Do I want to really get up early enough to meditate, or do I want to just, open my phone and just lie on the bed for another, what do I want to do this afternoon? Do I want to work on a book I have to edit, or do I want to read my novel? And I read my novel and I lie in bed, those extra hours. Every day is the Battle of Kurukshetra again. But
That's a
I know
nice
which army.
reference.
I know which army I'm part of, and I'm not.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely beautiful. And again, the more you talk, the more questions I have. But this was something I meant to ask you, and you brought it up now. So in the context of it, it's coming
Mhm.
back down to the decisions that you make, right? The same thing, whether you lay in bed or whether you wake up and meditate. So um, before I get to the actual meditation part of it, there's something that I really wanted to ask from earlier as well, is how do we differentiate in our lives between our own will and what's divine will?
Most of the time, it's pretty obvious. We make it more complicated than it is. So again, it's very important to realize that just because something is not easy doesn't mean it's complicated. It can be very, very simple, but also very difficult to do. So sort of start like that. That isn't really that hard to know what God's will is, because what God's will is what will lead us to everlasting joy. And God's will is also that we have the experiences that we need to learn to what we don't already know. So you can't just sort of sit on the fence and wait for God to tell you what to do, because the first true intuition you have is get off the fence, do something, because if you're afraid even to engage, if you're afraid of error and mistake and so on like that. But I mean, divine will is to live in harmony with reality as it is. And reality is more powerful than our preferences. So a lot of times we at least I myself, I had a very dramatic experience of this fairly early on in my spiritual life. I had a choice to make which was very black and white. Either I would do this or I would do that. And there was no mixing them up and doing both. And I was just beginning on the spiritual path. I was already in the community with Swami, and I was very dramatically constantly asking God what he wanted, and then in my very dramatic way talking about how distressed I was because I just, God wasn't talking to me. I would just go on and on. And at one point, I actually went to speak to Swami Kriyananda. At that time, our community was very small, and eventually Swami's living on 3 continents, and it's not quite so accessible. But I just walked down the hill from where I lived, and I knocked on his door. So I'm telling him about this great angst that I'm having because I don't know what God wants, and I'm weeping. And I said, it's so hard to know what God wants. And Swami said, no, it's not. Just like that. No, it's not. And that was all he said. So anyway, eventually I get back to my meditation cushion and I'm saying, well, I had changed in my mind what he'd said. I had changed it into Kriyananda saying it's easy for Kriyananda to know what God wants. And so I started to be mad at him because it's easy for him, but it's not easy for me. But then I realized that's not what he said. He said it's not hard to know. So I thought, why is it so hard for me to know? And it's a very different question. Why am I having so much trouble? And then I sort of had an inner conversation with Kriyananda. He was not in the room anymore, but in my inner voice, I heard him say, he said, because you don't want to know. I said, yes, I do. Yes, I do. But no, I don't. So I said, why don't I want to know? I said, because you're afraid. You're afraid. What am I afraid of? Oh, I'm afraid that it's going to be too hard. I'm afraid that I'm not going to get what I want. And then, so how do I stop being afraid? Well, then it gets to be a whole nother story. Is there God? Is Divine Mother a real way to define? Does God love me and want to comfort me? Does God like me? You know, am I alone? What is the purpose of life? Does suffering does suffering lead to a greater understanding? You see, all the questions start rolling around. They all start with fear. They all start with, what am I afraid of? So ever since then, which has been a long time, when I don't know what to do, instead of saying, what am I supposed to do? I say, what am I afraid of? And then I ask myself, why am I afraid of that? Yeah. And then eventually all questions lead to the same, because I don't have enough faith in God, or I don't trust that Divine Mother really loves me and knows what's best for me. And here I am. And that's okay. I can just say that. I can, and then you come to a whole nother aspect of God's will, intuition, which is, can I just be who I am? Do I have to always pretend to be better than I am? Who do I think I'm fooling when I say, oh Lord, whatever you want, thy will be done? I mean, you think he doesn't read a quarter of an inch into my consciousness and know that that is the fakest smile that's ever been, put in front of a deity? It's just like, of course, God, whatever you want, it's fine with me. No, it's not. So just being authentic. That's why Yogananda talked a great deal about Divine Mother. And I know it's, my Indian friends tell me that, they often, Divine Mother means Mother Kali or some particular deity. That's not at all what Yogananda meant. What he meant was the Comforter. That's how Jesus called it in the Bible. Jesus never spoke of the feminine because it wasn't timely. Nobody would have believed him. Jesus was trying to get God from being the evil judge to being the loving father, but to get all the way to the mother was too far. So, in the West, this is all Western issues. In the West, the father we've got down. And the father is absolutely necessary. The masculine has to stay there and say, when you stop crying, get up and do the job, But the mother also comes and says, my poor baby, And all of it is needed. But the comforter, that Divine Mother, comforts us. She can't change the law for us. She can't make it different. She can't say, oh, you can do it exactly as you want. You'll still get everything you want. Because if it isn't true, it isn't true. Reality always wins. We think that satisfying our desire for ease and pleasure and identifying with this small body is going to make us happy. And it doesn't. Because at the very least, we die. Sickness, old age, and death. That's what the Buddha was trying. That's why he left. It happens to everybody. So they can't change the law, but they can comfort us as we learn. So my fear always comes down to, I don't have enough trust that Divine Mother's in charge. And then I get to work on the real problem. Because the real problem is not, should I do this or should I do that? The real problem is I'm not connected enough.
Yes.
To know. And often God's will is our will. I mean, our will is God's will. It's like Swami Kriyananda said to me once, God doesn't really want you to be unhappy. He said, that's your idea. Just because you do want it doesn't mean that God doesn't want it.
Yeah.
It's just whatever is going to teach you what you need to learn.
But that's the problem that anyone on the spiritual path definitely faces. It's a practical and known challenge of this process of what is it that I want, or in alignment with what does God want. But it's also like the same thing about giving up control. It's like the surrendering part to God, to the divine, surrendering to God's will. What really needs to happen here, I think, and that what you mentioned is the fear aspect, is because I don't want to give up control because I have fear and I'm scared And then you took it a step further. It's like, why am I scared? It's because, yes, you don't have enough faith in the divine. So,
And I having control is also, I mean, God is not separate from me. Divine Mother is not separate from me. When your loving mother guides you through something, or your loving mother is standing on the side while you do your best, but is there to comfort you all the way through, is that losing control? And it's just in our own minds. If
mm,
this is the funnel. If I'm going to live down here and I'm going to say it's everything, and if I have to move out of here, then I think that's wrong. But it's just a mistake. And
mm,
that's the word mistake is a very simple word. It's just a mistake. It's a misunderstanding. It's just like a child. This is why we think about God as Father, Mother, and we say the word, I'm a child of God. Because when you look at children, it's so easy to see when you look at children, and it's so easy to see. I mean, sometimes it's painful. They're learning painful lessons, but you just see these are necessary lessons. I thought I could jump off the roof and fly. No, actually, that didn't work, did it for you? I thought I could drive the car, and I'm 6 years old. When I was about 4, I did some sculpture out of mud, and it was
mm,
three balls, like three snowballs piled on top of each other like that, or three golf balls. And I wanted my mother to put it in the oven, to fire it into pottery. I also vaguely wanted it to be bronzed. And I was so upset because nobody could appreciate that my art needed to be preserved. Now, I believe this is a past life memory, but at 4 years old, I couldn't keep the whole thing straight. I didn't know where. A lot of times when children do things like that, they don't know that they're children. They think they're still what they were.
mm,
That's why mommy, watch me dance. You think I'm so beautiful as a dancer. And to themselves, they're back on the stage, doing
mm,
some great ballet. I was there with trying to get my mother to preserve my art. And it's adorable. It's really adorable, and it's adorable to me even as I think about it. That's how Divine
yeah.
Mother watches us. I'm going to be the CEO of this big company. Watch me. Watch me, Mommy. I'm the CEO. She says, yes, honey, that's so good. Well done.
So, Asha, then what is this term? How would you explain what is Dharma and how do you fulfill your Dharma?
That's a very good question. Dharma is that action which leads to expanded consciousness. So, and what leads to expanded consciousness depends on where your consciousness is now. So for some people, for example, to marry, to raise children, to take care of your in-laws and all your cousins, to earn a great deal of money, to make everybody's life work, is an enormous expansion of consciousness. The discipline, the will, the self-definition that gets bigger than that, the creativity and the determination that's required to make money. It's not that any of those things in themselves is an end in itself, but in order to succeed at those things, in order to prioritize them, your inner consciousness is totally changed. Courage, determination, selflessness, attunement to the needs of others, intuition, countless things. Once you've done that for a whole bunch of lifetimes, and that way of being has taught you everything it has to teach you, and there's no new lessons in it for you, then when you reach the age of 20 and you see them arranging the marriage, you sneak out the back door and you're never seen from again. And everybody screams, but your dharma was to take care of the family. Not anymore, because it doesn't expand my consciousness to do that.
Mm,
And that's where society gets confused, because if society does not understand that self-realization is the goal, it just wants you to keep repeating what you've already done, especially if you're good at it.
mm,
They just want you to keep doing it. But it's not your dharma anymore. This is the Gita. When a higher duty conflicts with a lower duty, the lower duty is no longer your duty. But you have to be very careful, because sometimes, your reason for wanting to repudiate a certain duty is not really elevated. It's based on fear, it's based on laziness, it's all kinds of things. But you can see just that example. For one person, it's growth. For another, it's stagnation.
Mm.
And so it's not necessarily victory just to do what everybody thinks you ought to do. You have to really ask yourself, is this really going to move me where I really want to go? Which is, I mean, the Buddha walked away. The Buddha's the famous example. You know, his father wanted him to be a king. And being a king would mean nothing to him. He had a much bigger duty to follow. And of course, none of us who walk away from things that others expected of us have become the Buddha, but we've moved in the right direction.
Mm.
You know? I mean, that was what I felt even when I was school smart. The thing about school smart for me was so frustrating because it gave me nothing back because I just already knew how to do it. I could read before I got there. I just already knew how to do it. And so it took no energy from me to do it.
Mm.
And then I got a disproportionate amount of praise for essentially doing nothing. And so it made me kind of crazy. I mean, it's divided inside myself because I knew I was getting accolades without earning them. And so I felt very like this. That's why I got A's and F's when I finally went to university. And they had a lot to teach, but nothing that I wanted to know. So as soon as I found some place where, it was what I wanted to know, but it wasn't my Dharma anymore.
Mm.
And, 50 years later, it's easy to see. When I was 22, it wasn't as clear to everyone as it was to me.
Yes.
when I was in India, I was in Bangalore and visiting an Ananda group, and I was telling them this about just leaving everything. And they said to me, "And what did your parents say?" And I said, "Well, first, I'm an American. You have to start there. I'm not Indian." And then I said, "I did not think to ask them because it wasn't their decision. It was
Yeah.
mine." But nobody could have stopped me. Just, I knew my own destiny. And it was disconcerting to my parents, but they got used to it.
Yeah, thank you. That's a beautiful story. Based on your teachings based on the teachings of self-realization and your experiences with Swami Kriyananda and obviously the propagated teachings by Paramahansa Yogananda, how would you say one can spiritualize their relationships?
Well, perfect love casts out all fear. And, the Indian tradition is better than the Western tradition in this sense, which is the ideal love in India is mother love. In the West, it's romantic sexual love, which is one of the many reasons why we need help on that side. But in any case, the ideal of mother love, and believe me, I know enough to know that many mothers do not fulfill the idea of mother love. So it's not a human form we're talking about. But the idea of mother love is simply that I'm here to make your life work for you. And I'm not here for myself. I'm here for you. I mean, just even the process of giving birth and so on like that. And just the mother sacrifices herself, but so does the father, because it's pure love. It's like my life is here to serve your welfare. So the beginning is, my life is here to serve your welfare. My life is here to help you on your journey to self-realization. My life is not here to make your life small and selfish if that's what you want. I'm not here to support your delusions. I'm here to support your divine destiny. If self-realization is the goal, then what is the purpose of human relationships? To help each other grow in consciousness ever closer to God. Now, merely because you love someone or were born into their family or marry them or give birth to them as a child, it does not mean that you match in terms of consciousness. People are drawn together for many different reasons. And you can't just say, I'm here to sacrifice my life for you. That's just too narrow an idea. Lower duty, a higher duty, it has to be honored if a lower duty can't be honored. I mean, if it takes away, I'm not saying that clearly, but you know what I mean. But the other part of it is it's extremely important to realize is that we are all equal in the eyes of God. We are all equally loved. So it is not, you are not more important than the people you love and the people who love you, but you are not less important than them either. And so to sacrifice yourself inappropriately is not love. It's cowardice, honestly, because we tend to do it because we think it's going to bring us something we want, because it's too difficult to also stand up for ourselves. So we have to look at all our relationships very impersonally, and we have to measure them all in terms of everybody's goal. What is in harmony with the highest principles that all of us aspire to? Whether the people around you consciously aspire to them or not, it's where their souls are going. So, just to come back to, did I ask my parents if I could leave everything and go be at Ananda? It was like, from what basis would they answer that question? They had no understanding of what it was that I wanted. They loved me through my whole life. They're long past now. They were very good parents. I really appreciated it. But it wasn't their decision. The fact that it made them happy or not happy, or they thought it was good or they were afraid of it, didn't matter, because we're all equal. This one was my decision. And if they didn't want it, then I could be very nice to them. When I at one point I asked Swamiji about it, what do I do with my parents? Because my life had separated from them so far. He said, if they ever tried to do anything to prevent you from following the spiritual path. I said, no, never. He said, well, then you owe them respect and honor. He said, if they tried to take you off the spiritual path, that would be different. But they never did. So I respected them and honored them, but I never cooperated with what they would have preferred, because it wasn't their decision, it was mine. Fortunately, in my life, that did not cause any great difficulties. But on a couple of occasions, I've had to make hard decisions in terms of my commitment to certain people in my life, because to maintain that relationship, I had a higher duty. And it would not have served their well-being either for me to sacrifice mine, because it would have set up a dissonance. It was sufficient that they didn't understand, but if I had let their delusion actually diminish me, you would see it would have been worse for them. And Swami said that to us at one point about going home for Christmas, was actually the context, which is, I was Jewish, so I was spared from that. But when we were first beginning, he said, Christmas is too sacred a holiday for you to spend it in worldly company. You need to stay in the ashram. And then he said, even if your parents' egos are distressed, he said, their souls will rejoice, because it's great good karma for them to have given birth to a devotee. And all of your spiritual progress will also come back to them, because they have enabled, they have sacrificed to bring you to this point. And so you continue. So you sort of begin to understand that. And the principle behind that is really simple. Where there is dharma, there is victory. And if something is not dharmic, there will be nothing good come from it, regardless of whether you're keeping the peace in the moment. So that's a simple rule. And after that, open your heart, be joyful. What have you got to lose? You'll get hurt, you won't get hurt, but at least you'll learn. You can't just be like this. God compels us to be with each other because we have so much to learn from one another.
Yes.
And if we imagine that if you love me in this certain way, and you always love me in this certain way, or if I get to love you in this certain way, then I will be happy. And what we're basically saying is, you have to behave a certain way because that's what I want. And gee, how is that working out for you? Not very well.
Yeah.
But it's hard. It's super hard, especially these days when
Yes.
society is so fragmented. It's just almost unbearably painful much of the time.
Mm.
But that's what drives us to God. Otherwise, we're just like a child who won't let go of its teddy bear. You
Yeah.
know, you're 21 years old. You have to put your teddy bear down. You
Yeah.
know, it's okay when you're 4, but you can't hold it for the rest of your life.
Mm.
Although I do
You
have a
know,
stuffed animal, a little table behind.
uh, you touched on relationships just now, how it's defined in the West and what it means in the East with love and stuff. So, um, how would one attract their soulmate?
By becoming the person you're trying to attract. People come to me, have come to me. I don't do this much anymore, but people would come to me with a deep desire to be married, man or woman, both sides, just not, like that. And here's the things I suggested. First, I said, make a list of everything that you think is going to happen to you after you find your partner. And then look at that list and ask yourself, really, some of those things are never going to be possible unless you have a partner. But there are many things on that list that you could actually start doing now. It's just that you think you can't until you have this other person with you. But as long as you're just sitting there waiting for this to happen, the magnetic signal that you're putting out is not a very clear or a very powerful one. And if you're just sitting there because you're going to suddenly become this other person as soon as somebody gets there, somebody who's already strong and has something to offer is not going to find you very interesting. You're more likely to get somebody who's just like you, who's just frozen up in the dirt. And you can see the problem.
Mm.
Basically, having a soul relationship with someone in a romantic way is a very important learning stage in life. It's a very important fulfillment. We are not, as long as we long for that and don't have it, we will always be restless. So it's exactly what we need. And we long for it, but you will attract according to the lessons that you need to learn. And so you want to start learning as many lessons as you can right now so that that relationship will be supportive instead of one that is only about things that you don't already understand. So make a perfect picture of who you want your partner to be and then try to become that person, because that will make you much more attractive to that person. You know, I will have a beautiful home. We'll make a beautiful home. And if you don't have the money to have a big home, then make your room,
Mm.
you know, what you want it to be. If you want to have adventures, go out and have adventures. If you want to love children, find children to love. I mean,
Mm.
do now what you think you have to wait to do. So, and then two things will happen. You'll be in much better shape to attract the right person and to be able to relate to them, or you'll have a pretty good life whether they come or
Yes,
not.
yes, that's beautiful. That's a lovely answer. And while we're on the topic of relationships as well, a twofold question. One is obviously with relationships, there's hurt and moving past that. So how can we forgive people that's hurt? And the second part would probably be like, how does one cope with the death of a loved one?
Um, Forgiveness, we'll start with forgiveness is a beautiful word. People use it a lot. I've never liked it myself, and this is just me. Swami Kriyananda uses it, everyone uses it. But I don't like forgiveness because forgiveness makes me right and you wrong, but I'm so generous I've forgiven you. Okay, now in fact, I may be right and you may be wrong. So you can't also just say, oh, everything you did was just perfect. Some woman who'd been very hurt by another person came to Swamiji and was struggling to overcome it, came to Swamiji and said, everything happens the way it's supposed to happen. So I guess it was just what was really right to happen. Swami said, no, it wasn't. They behaved very badly. He says, he said, don't comfort yourself by telling yourself a lie.
Mm.
So if somebody has really behaved in ways that were not admirable. That's a fact. And what are you actually forgiving? I'm forgiving you for not being an avatar. I'm forgiving you for having karma that you had to act out. What am I actually forgiving
Yeah.
you for? So I much prefer the word acceptance.
Mm.
That I just accept that this is who you are, or this is what had to happen, or this is who I am, and therefore this is a lesson that I had to have. And that doesn't make me better or worse. It's just, it was a necessary learning experience that you would behave in this way and I would respond in this way. And in reality, I feel like most of what we do is that we scream at the universe and want it to be different. And it can't be different. So to accept is, well, I can't fly. I can't breathe underwater. I can't manifest $1 million just by wanting to manifest it. I have to accept what I'm dealing with. If I were an amputee and I suddenly only had one leg, I can't just get out of bed every day and say, I have two legs.
Mm.
I don't. I have one. So what can I build with one leg? What can I build of relationship or friendship or family, given that this is who you are? And now I know who you are, or at least who you were in that moment, what you've become. So now I know. So let me see what I can make out of this. And if I can't accept it in the sense that it's not appropriate for me to accept that this is somebody treats me so in such a way that is so inappropriate for them and for me, I have to accept the fact that I have to walk away from that relationship. And that the higher dharma is to stand by what I'm not that good. I'm not capable of just accepting this as the reality. I have to move on and find another one. And that's not easy. None of this is easy. These are lifetime practices.
Mm.
And you go over and over and over again. It plays out in your head. And you keep asking yourself, what am I trying to accomplish here? How best can I accomplish it? There was a person who was very duplicitous, very treacherous, and eventually they left our community. And there was sort of a question about whether Swami would allow them back. I said, sir, if person really repented and wanted to come back, I said, what would you do? Would you take them? He said, oh yes. He said, but now that I know what they're capable of, he said, I would treat them a little differently.
Mm.
I wouldn't expect you to be something that I can see that you're not.
Yes.
So it's not a question of forgiveness. It's just, well, this is who you are. Therefore, I have to be a little more conscious about how I go about this. What was the other half of it you said? It
The
was
second
after
one of it was how to cope with the
death.
death of a loved one.
Yeah, there you have it, don't you? That's part of what drives us to God,
Mm.
is because even if it's perfect and it's beautiful, the day will come. That was when I said earlier, even from an early age, I had this sort of experience, almost you would call it, vision maybe, of my deathbed when I was about 18, just before I got on the path. And it was interesting. I didn't even know anybody who died, what to speak of being at a deathbed, which I've been a number of times since, just because of the life I have. But my picture was very accurate. But I was experiencing it from the inside. I was dying. And I'd had a successful life in this sort of imaginary story. And there were a lot of people who loved me, who were around me. But I realized that nobody could go with me. And I couldn't take one of them with me. I mean, for now I understand it in broader ways, but so my consciousness was all I ever have. So even when we're loving people, all we ever have is our consciousness. And they also have to have the right to go on. You can't, it's not fair if you keep mourning and keep mourning. It's like if your child goes off to college, goes off in another city or another country, and you call every day and tell them how sad you are and how much you don't wish they were home, and you're having this grand new adventure going on to your next stage, and every day your mother calls to cry into the telephone. After a while, you'll stop taking her calls because you need to go on.
Mm.
So one of the ways to get over people leaving is if you really do love them,
Mm.
you have to support them. They're not betraying you. They're just going on to their
Mm.
next step. And you have to support them in that. And you also have to realize, thank there's a level of ingratitude involved in saying, "Oh, well, you gave me all of your lifetime. Why did you have to die?" Well, how much can I give you? At a certain point, my body's done. At a certain point, my karma is done.
Mm.
It has nothing to do with whether I love you. It just has to do with the fact that this was beautiful and now it's over. Now, bear in mind, when Yogananda's most advanced woman disciple died, and Yogananda himself said, "I saw her merge into the infinite light," he still wept at her funeral because their friendship had been so beautiful,
Mm.
and the parts they had played had been so blissful that he naturally wept. Now it's
Mm.
over. Spring, fall has turned into winter, and it is winter. That's all that it is. So you have to play it on all levels. On one level, you have to just be glad that they've had a triumphant end to their incarnation or
Mm.
whatever it was. You have to be deeply grateful for all that you enjoyed together, and then you have to trust God.
Mm.
You have to trust that everything is unfolding as it is supposed to, and you have to ask the question, um, what am I supposed to be learning here? That's
Yes.
another question. What am I supposed to be learning? Not what do I want,
Mm.
but since my Divine Mother loves me unconditionally, Divine Mother, why did you do this to me?
Mm.
What gift are you giving me? What opportunity are you giving me? And you can't pretend that you're not heartbroken.
Mm.
And think how fortunate you are to have had someone you love so much that now you're heartbroken.
Mm. No, that's
Everything
true.
can be turned. Everything can be turned. And then how do I get along? What did they do for me that now I have to do for myself?
Very
But
different
this
way
is
of
what
framing it and thinking about it, like in that sense. So that's something that a lot of people, including myself, doesn't put yourself in that perspective to think about. So those are actually the questions we should be asking. Now, to put all of these together, we spoke about various aspects of of life, practical ways of living, and existential questions, fundamental existential questions. Now, what is the role of meditation in traversing this journey? And what's the end goal of meditation?
meditation is to escape from the tiny little bottom of the funnel and to expand our consciousness so that we can still operate as we need to in this limited body, but we know at all times that there's a much greater reality than just this one, which increases our sense of joy, which takes away a tremendous number of fears, which gives us a direct experience of the conscious, loving presence of God and Guru and angelic beings and all of that. So it's no longer a question of, I wonder if it's true. It's like I have experienced um, on some, I've even just glimpsed a dimension of reality that puts this one in an entirely different proportion. Now, what we also have to understand is most of the time, our minds just are like a rock rolling downhill, never stops. I mean, if you anesthetize yourself with your telephone or your television or your drugs or drinking or whatever people do, that you dull your consciousness and you kind of lose awareness for a while. That's one kind of experience, but it doesn't give you something that expands your awareness. It just gives you a break in the experience. Otherwise, the rock just rolls and rolls and rolls and rolls and rolls and rolls. Meditation is, even if the experience of meditation gives you nothing that the books promise you it's going to give you, at least you're slowing down the momentum.
Mm.
At least you're giving yourself a chance. You're moving closer toward a reset where you just get to start over. I mean,
Mm.
even on a daily basis, it's the same effect that a good night's sleep has
Mm.
only much more long lasting, because sleep is only a factor of the physical body, but this is a factor of the consciousness. If your consciousness is a wild horse running away from you, when you first start pulling back on the reins and saying, whoa, horsey, please stop,
Yeah.
the horsey won't stop. But if you ever are going to get mastery over where you're going, you have to start somewhere.
Mm.
So what I have observed in my own life also, it's not, I mean, nice experiences in meditation are wonderful. Having a real perception of something bigger than the average is wonderful. But even
Mm.
if you have almost no or even none, the commitment to try starts a whole flow of energy
Mm.
that that your life will change completely because you're meditating, even if the meditation itself doesn't seem to be doing anything.
Mm.
And I swear to that. I know that's the truth because you've said, all right, you've made an announcement to the universe. I'm interested.
Mm.
I, I want to know because we're surrounded by angelic beings and divine forces all the time, but well, it's like when the sun is shining and the curtains are closed. The sun is just as bright, but you don't get anything from
Mm.
it. But if you open the curtains, whatever sunshine is there will come through.
Yes.
Meditation is like opening the curtain. And maybe the window's kind of dirty, so it's going to take time before the sun comes through. But every time you meditate, you're scraping off a little bit of,
Sure.
and then it just starts coming through, even though it may look like ordinary life. You gradually figure out that something's changed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we can very easily get caught up with like chasing an experience. So an experience happens, and you can just, especially on the path, you'll want to cling to that or chase another experience. And so you've actually answered the next two questions that I had with that statement, because I was going to ask you, like, how do you know if it's working? And should we be concerned if we don't have an experience? And you very eloquently answered that. And I'm sure, like, when you're meditating like that, you'll definitely know and see it working in all aspects of your life, whether it be your relationships with people, how you react to situations or problems, what you really consider as a problem, how you engage with the people in the world, how you perform your work duties. You'll feel meditation and that experience is working in that regard, especially when it's built up over a period of time, I'm sure.
But it's not necessarily one. It's not like, oh, I was meditating and I got the solution.
Mm.
It's like I meditate regularly, nothing much happens. Yeah, that's what we should do over here. Yes, this is what we should do. Oh, how
Mm.
nice to meet you. I mean, just there's a flow that begins to
Mm.
come into it. And some kind of things happen on many levels other than the conscious mind. So what the conscious mind actually receives and knows is only a very small part of what's happening at all times. So the act of meditation begins to just take the lid off a little and open it up, and the energies start coming through you, even if you don't realize that they're related. After a while, you see that something very suspicious is happening. That's all I can say.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, that's beautiful. Asha, so how has Kriya Yoga shaped your life to the point of where you're at now? Linking back to the journey of when we spoke about this little girl seeking truth and realizing that you're not going to get it through books, the wisdom. You're going to get knowledge, but not wisdom. That whole journey, meeting Swami Kriyananda, the disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda, and being part of Ananda and serving at Palo Alto, uh, being initiated in the Nayaswami order. And to where we are having this conversation right now, how has Kriya Yoga shaped your life and your journey?
Well, all of that is Kriya Yoga. Kriya Yoga is a specific technique of meditation in which we can interiorize our consciousness and begin to really influence the flow of internal energy. It's, just like medicine, physical medicine. No, everyone knows how the heart works and where the blood is pumped and how the air comes in. Nobody thinks that you breathe through your elbow, because there's an objective fact to it. There's an objective fact to the way that the more subtle energy flows in the physical system and how it leads to other dimensions, into the chakras, into the astral body, into the causal world, all of that. All of that is Kriya Yoga is the science of reality. Kriya Yoga is the science of reality. It opens the door to these more and more subtle realities. But Kriya Yoga is not just the technique that enables you to know that. It's everything that you
Mm-hmm.
have to, everything, all the implications of that, just as we've been discussing, in every single area of your life. So Kriya Yoga, if you really want to ask what is Kriya Yoga? Kriya Yoga is that action which brings you into attunement with self-realization, with your own higher consciousness. And it's everything. I can't I can say Kriya Yoga, I can say Swami Kriyananda, I can say self-realization, I can say God, I can say Divine Mother, and I'm saying the same thing. I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying this is the map for the journey, and it's a completely integrated, comprehensive reality. Yogananda said one of his marvelous statements among many, take care of the minutes, he said, and incarnations will take care of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So we tend to think of it as this sort of big system that in the future will bring some big change. He's saying every minute of your life is the same, which is either in this minute, I attune myself to a higher reality and allow myself to be an instrument of the light, or I attune myself to a small reality and am very parsimonious about how much of the light I let through. And there's no point at which you suddenly become that instead of becoming this. It's like we are not a fixed entity. That's what Kriya Yoga teaches. Kriya Yoga is about energy, how the energy
Mm-hmm.
flows, what the vibration of that energy is, how to keep the energy attuned through the chakras, through the Christ center, all of those things. But that's a moment by moment by moment by moment. In this moment, am I choosing to be an instrument of the light or not? In this moment, am I choosing to expand my consciousness, or am I trying to escape from it and dull it? And every time, this is what I learned from Vivekananda all those years ago, who you are today is the result of what you did yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And who you are tomorrow is the result of what you did today. And I get it even smaller. An hour from now, the consciousness I'm in will be depending on what I do with the next hour.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Kriya Yoga is, because Kriya Yoga is based on the inhalation and the exhalation. And when you're doing Kriya, you're breathing in and you're breathing out. Gosh, seems to me like I'm always breathing in and breathing out, aren't I? So like, what am I actually doing? So the answer is everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's the marvelous, to my mind, the marvelous thing about the way Paramahansa Yogananda, and especially Kriyananda, um, brought the idea of self-realization, is that it's completely integrated. There's not one molecule, not one atom of life that is separate from Kriya Yoga. Because what am I doing with my consciousness? That's why I said the question, look at the room that you live in, look at the clothes that you wear. Like, what kind of consciousness am I expressing? And if it isn't as uplifted as you would like it to be, turn and face the right direction and start moving.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there's momentum, there's karma, there's all these other things that make it not quite so simple.
Mm-hmm.
But Kriya Yoga also answers that. By meditating in the proper way, you begin to change the karma in the chakras. And then it becomes easier to do this or to do that. But
Yeah.
this is a long project.
Yes, it is. It's a long project.
It's a long project. When I started, I read somewhere that Master said, you have within you a portable paradise, meaning the presence of God. And for some reason, in my naivete, I thought, oh, 5 years, I'll have it all down. I just made that up. I just made that up. I have nothing.
Yeah.
And 5 years later, it was like, oops. But there's a pole star now. And that's what happened when I met Swami
Mm.
and really got on this path. A fixed point of reference
Mm,
by which everything can be measured. And that changes everything because now I can tell.
mm,
It doesn't mean that I don't get sucked over here,
yeah.
but when I wake up, which eventually you do, oh, where am I in relation to the pole star? Oh, come back. And Kriya Yoga is the
Mm,
pole star, it's all about energy and consciousness. That's the pole star.
mm. Absolutely profound. There's so much of gems that you dropped with what you said from the start of our conversation to now. And definitely, I'm going to watch this back a few times and pick up on all of these points because it's stuff that's going to be penetrated into my mind and helps me to traverse whatever it is I'm going through. And it's definitely going to help the viewers, the audience in this. So thank you for sharing that. Asha, you've always had a profound way of conveying these complex ideas and thoughts and putting it in a way that's simple to digest and understand. Ever since I met you first in person in 2023, I was proud to be one of the people that attended the initiation in South Africa, the first in-person meditation initiation into Kriya Yoga in South Africa. We've had a lovely conversation there and always really enjoy speaking with you and learning from you and spending time with you. So thank you for talking with us here. I think to close off, I wanted to ask you, what is your message to the audience that's listening to this podcast? And what would you like them to know? If there's something that somebody could have told you when you were started out your journey, what you wish you knew.
Uh, Well, somebody did tell me, but joy is within you. Your true nature, you are meant for happiness, but not in the way that you think about that. You have to have the creativity, the courage, the energy, the open-mindedness to explore. Don't just cling to what you think you already know. Have the humility and the receptivity. Try to build an inner relationship with the divine and pray constantly, guide me, bless me, show me, even if you don't know who or what you're praying to. Or just open me to a greater and better way to live. And I say that right now this is extremely important. Yogananda made very, very serious predictions about very difficult times. And you don't have to be a prophet to see that. Now is not the time to think, oh, I'll deal with serious issues later. No, now is the time to say, the world needs light, and I want to be an instrument of that light. And, seek out valid dynamic sources of true spiritual wisdom. Naturally, I speak of Yogananda and Kriyananda, of course, and I have a ashajoy.com. That's my own website. My job is 100%. My only responsibility is to tell you what Swami Kriyananda told me. Seek out wisdom where you feel it exists and take what is meaningful to you. You don't have to take the whole package. Take what's meaningful to you, but do something. Do something to expand the light within you, to expand the light that comes through you, and then to expand the light in the world.
Absolutely beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us. Asha, if people want to follow your work, follow your message, how can they engage with your work? Where can they find your resources?
If just type Asha Nayaswami and you'll have lots of choices. I'm on Instagram, I'm on YouTube, I'm on whatever, I'm on Facebook. I have a Patreon account. My website is ashajoy.com, but my name serves you. I have a very talented friend who does all that for me. If I was alone, you would never be able to find me. But we make it possible for you to just access long form, short form, all these different ways of seeking the light. We're all in this
Mm.
together, friends. Let's hold hands, and help each other along the way. That's what we're here for.
Many hands make a miracle.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, thank you very much, Asha. I really enjoyed speaking to you, and thank you very much for your time and sharing your wisdom with all of us here today.
Well, it's been really delightful to see you again. And I thought we had met when I was there, and I'm so glad, just so glad to have been invited. You made it easy. It was very easy to talk about these things because you're, I can feel your magnetic and sincere interest. Very, very good.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, everybody. Goodbye. So, Asha,